Welcome to the Unlist. This is a big one. We are talking about Aramis by Estee Lauder and Cabochard by Parfum Gray. Sometimes just called Cabochard de Gray because a lot of Parfum Gray fragrances are something de Gray, right? Like Homme de Gray, Cabotin de Gray, etc., etc. Now, what's important about Aramis and Cabochard is they basically are two halves of the same coin. They are reflections of one another. Not that they are identical compositions, don't get that twisted, but Aramis and Cabochard are they're like twins, but not identical twins, like what you would call fraternal twins. So one's boy, one's girl, right? The irony is, Cabochard, depending on how you see things, can actually read as more masculine, according to modern noses, than Aramis does, because of the way it deals with certain keynotes I'll discuss later. But unless you live under a rock, you at least know what Aramis is. I wouldn't fault you for not knowing what Cabochard is, because Cabochard, even though it's a very important perfume, most men out there don't really get into fragrances released for women. Like the really, really huge ones, obviously most men know what number 5 is by Chanel. Most men know what Poison is by Dior, stuff like that. But most guys don't really get any knowledge on women's releases. They just let the women in their lives handle that, right? So, like I said, wouldn't fault the average guy for not knowing what Cabochard is, but Aramis, unless you live under a rock, you should probably know what Aramis is. Now, you could say this is a single fragrance review, but it's technically two fragrances. They're just two extremely similar fragrances, like I said, two sides of the same coin. And really, what makes Aramis so important is not really the way it smells. Yes, it smells fantastic, but what makes Aramis so important is that it foreshadowed the arrival of its own namesake brand. That's really important because there wasn't any exclusively male perfume houses or divisions of other houses or brands in general. There were men's fragrances, Arden for men, Chanel for men, blah, 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 blah. But there was never a house or a division of a house, or like I said, a label that was exclusively men's. But Aramis ushered that in. As far as I know, Aramis is the first. If there are others that are more obscure, that came out before, that didn't get the credit they were due, you can tell me about those if you want to. And I'm not talking about barbershop brands either, because you could say, oh, well, there are all these English barbershop brands that have only made stuff for men. I'm like, yeah, but it's a barbershop. That's typically male clientele to begin with. I'm talking about effectively fine perfumes, high perfumery, okay? Estee Lauder is like Lancome. They are like the cosmetic equivalent of a Chanel or a Dior. That's high-end stuff. And in that particular echelon of fragrance, there wasn't an exclusively male label until Aramis came around, like I said, 1965. Although some of you out there are going to say, oh, but Aramis launched in 64. Yes, like I said, Aramis the fragrance foreshadowed the arrival of Aramis the brand a year later. The original Aramis by Estee Lauder, when it was an Estee Lauder fragrance, was a limited release, launched in New York and London to gauge interest. When it became very successful, then they went, and they scaled up changed the logo. That first year logo looks very different from the logo that you're used to seeing. And then in 65, they rolled out Aramis, the brand, which would have the fragrance. So no longer was it Aramis by Estee Lauder, it was Aramis. Just Aramis by Aramis, I guess. Now, Cabochard came out a number of years earlier in 1959, so right the tail end of the 50s, and it was a fragrance released by Parfum Grey, which is a older French perfume house which also had cosmetics and things, and it was named after a person, and there's a story behind that, and I could get into that, but it would make this video start to lose the plot, so I can do a video on Parfum Grey later, talk about Madame Grey and everything else, but for right now we're just going to focus on Cabochard. Came out in 1959, and it was basically Grey's answer to Chanel No. 5. Some of you guys don't realize, but years and years ago, dare I say generations ago at this point, because 1959 wasn't like a couple decades ago. There are people who were born in that year who aren't alive now. So, like I said, it's not a short amount of time ago. Now, there are a lot of folks who definitely are still alive who were born before that. You know, there are folks in their 80s and 90s and 100s. So don't get that. Okay, let's, again, all this whataboutism constantly. Oh, I want to get you. I want to gotcha. You said something and I want to refute it. Don't do that. Don't do that, because if that's the only reason why you're on my channel, I'm just going to make you not exist. I'm going to push a magic button and you'll go away. So don't do that to me, all right? Yes, we know there's always a, well, what about, well, I gotcha, you know, just don't do that. Like I said, it's juvenile, first of all. So, and we all have Google in our back pockets anyway, so it just doesn't make sense to do that. But Cabochard was kind of the answer to Chanel No. 5. And some of you are going to say, but wait a minute, that came out in 1921. Why were perfume houses still clapping back at a fragrance launched in 1921? And that's where I was starting to say, some of you guys don't realize that once upon a time, fragrances stayed popular for more than a few years. In this day and age, right, in 2025, we have people who are just worried that a fragrance they bought 5 years ago is no longer cool. They've used that much of their bottle. It's a big bottle, so they've used that much of their bottle, and they're on TikTok, they're on Instagram, they're like, oh, is this still relevant? Is this still relevant? Like, relevance matters. Like, who are you trying to be relevant for? You know, when people become so obsessed with trends and, you know, getting picked up by algorithms and getting exposure to strangers for God knows what reason. We can't all be celebrities, okay? We can't all be famous. But when that becomes your drive, things have shorter and shorter and shorter lifespans in the public memory, in the public consciousness. And because of that, because of the constant grind, the doom scrolling, the dopamine drip of today's social media and everything else, a fragrance that's 5 years old is already put out the pasture. I had people asking me in 2020, right, 5 years ago, is Sauvage still cool? Or is it old now? Is it an old man fragrance? And, you know, swearing is not the best thing on YouTube, I understand, but I don't care, I'm not monetized. But I am like, what the fuck are you talking about? This is an old man fragrance after having only been launched 5 years ago. What are you smoking? No, I don't even want to know what you're smoking, okay? Don't tell me. But I'm like, ugh. You know, that's the way you feel, just buy decants. Don't buy full bottles of anything, because you're going to get not even a chip into that bottle and be scared that it's outdated, that it's past tense, that you're no longer cool, because that's apparently why you wear fragrance, to be cool. But anyway, so yes, in 1959, people were still crazy about Chanel No. 5. Still very crazy about it. Perfumers were clapping back at number 5 in the 30s, in the 40s, and the 50s. You know, Joy by Jean Patou was a clapback at number 5. Arpège, which was on the heels of number 5, really, still in the 20s, also a clapback. Okay, all the way into the 50s. You know, Topaz by Avon was a clapback at number 5. So yeah. What made Cabochard, though, more novel than many other fragrances that were in that aldehydic floral chypre structure is that, and this is where Bernard Chant shows his true color, is it merged that aldehydic floral structure with the chewy, green, leathery chypre structure of something like Bandy. Now, I'm not saying it's a riff on any one fragrance, but if you wanted to really oversimplify things, and I mean really oversimplify, like you're kind of doing it in injustice by doing this, but if you really wanted to just cut it down to the most basic elements, so ABC 1, 2, 3 can understand, okay? The Hooked on Phonics version of this is Chanel No. 5 and Bandy crossed, like the crossing of the streams in Ghostbusters. Something you're not supposed to do. You don't cross the streams. But if you're going to cross them anyway, you're crossing Chanel No. 5 on one hand and Bandy by Robert Piget on the other. Whoop! So you get that chewy mousse de saxicorde, you get that leathery, slightly castoreum. Isobutylquinoline plays a big part of Bandy's structure. And then you get the waxy iris, the ylang, the rose, the jasmine, which is the Chanel No. 5 aspect of it, right? The musks, and then the aldehydes on top. The big aliphatic aldehydes on top. So the ones that have a golden sort of resplendence and linger in the air for a long time. That is the magic of Cabochard. Now, there's a little bit of smokiness to it, and some of that gives people the impression of cigarettes. I personally don't really smell cigarettes in Cabochard, but I do understand it was a smoker's fragrance. I do understand that. And there's not a lick of sweetness. Not a lick of sweetness in Cabochard. And because of that, it's a tough sell for modern, conventional women. I don't want to say modern women and box everyone in, but the typical kind of woman that buys fragrances from a department store counter, like a Macy's, like a Dillard's, you know, those kind of places. They are used to things being much fruitier, much sweeter. You know, we're talking the Coco Mademoiselles of the world. We're talking the Good Girls. Okay, we're talking the vanillic, praline, sort of fruit jewelry stuff. And that has been the common theme for the past like 20 years in women's fragrances. Ever since gourmands came on the scene with Angel, right, which was back in the 90s, mind you, but ever since Angel really came around, women's fragrances have transformed and have become very sweet, very gourmand, very dessert-like. Yeah, there's still fresh stuff. Yeah, they still get aquatics, okay? It's not all gourmand. It's not all sweet. They get some variety. They get more variety than men do, okay? They get more variety than men do. But still, the fact is, a lot of the stuff is sweet. So, having a fragrance like this, that's almost bitter, just no sweetness, not a lick of sweetness, waxy, earthy, floral, musky, woody, very chypre, okay? Very leathery. It's a hard sell. And that's why a lot of guys, and that's why I said earlier, you know, for most modern noses, it's going to read masculine. Arguably more masculine than Aramis, because Aramis doesn't contain that chewiness, that waxiness. It's a different beast, and we'll talk about that. But first, let's wrap up Cabochard before we can move on to Aramis. So I don't have the newest, and I also don't have the oldest. But if you expect me to have a 1959 bottle of Cabochard in here, need I remind you that I'm not a rich man. Okay, I'm not going to sing Fiddler on the Roof. You know, if I were a rich man, you get a lot, lead a lot, lay, or however that goes. I don't really know, but I'm not doing that. And I get what I can afford. And personally, if we're going to get into the weeds on vintages, the best bang for buck is the just previous formula before the current one. The current one is good from what I hear, and I've sampled it. Doesn't smell bad to my nose, but for my preference, if you're not going all the way back and getting those black and white boxes with like the little hatching on it, if you're not getting one of those vintage boxes, and they cost a lot of money, like I said, if you're not going that far back, if you're not the deep pockets guy, so that's not you, then just go back to the black box, the tall black box with the bow on it. It's as far back as you have to go. Those still smell really good. So for our comparison here, I'm doing eau de toilette and eau de parfum. And it's actually good to use the same generation so I can tell you the differences, because this is where I'm really talking about Cabochard, where I'm wrapping up Cabochard. Now that you know the like basic history of the fragrance and all that stuff. So Bernard Chant released this for Parfum Grey, and it became like their best-selling women's fragrance. It's probably the oldest fragrance that they still make that still sells as well as it does. It's a classic, like Number 5, you know, like Shalimar, like a lot of other fragrances that are just considered timeless classics now. And there are still a lot of women who buy this. Granted, I don't know where they are in the world. Maybe they're in Europe, but I've never smelled a lady that's wearing this. Only us weird guys who collect these sort of things. They collect vintage fragrances for women. Us weirdos that make YouTube videos are the only folks that I know that smell like this. Never walked past any lady on the street that's, you know, doused in Cabochard, but maybe I'm in the wrong part of the world. Now, these two here are more different than you would think. People say, oh, but one's just a little stronger version of the other. Wrong. You wouldn't be more wrong, actually. Cabochard is just like Chanel Number 5. And a lot of classic fragrances do the same thing, where the concentration isn't just a bump in overall oil versus alcohol. No, it's a completely restructured fragrance. It's almost a flanker. Okay? That is why tons of people, especially people in the vintage community, will be like, yeah, the cologne is this vibe, and the parfum is that vibe, and the extrait is that vibe. And they can tell them apart. You think they're just being weird and batch code obsessed and like nitpicking the differences, but no, there are stark differences. And at least with this generation of fragrance, this era, the eau de toilette is so much more citrus and aldehydes. It is much brighter, and brighter, greener, okay? And in my opinion, this one is going to be a bit more about the aromatics. So the green notes, the woody notes, the oak moss, the citrus, the aldehydes. So sharper, greener, more aromatic. Fresher, but I'm using the word fresher with air quotes because it's a leather fragrance. Definitely better for hot weather though. Okay, now, eau de parfum, despite these bottles looking nearly identical, and the juice is not really much different, this is almost the same color as this. You can barely tell them apart. I've got to look at the bottom, and I've got to read the stickers to know which one I've got. Otherwise, I won't know until I spray it, right? Big surprise. Eau de parfum is waxier, more florals. The orris comes out, the rose comes out, the ylang comes out. You get more of the isobutyl-quinoline, the sour, leathery note, a bit smokier. Aldehydes are a bit more subdued in this. Things turn darker much faster. Dare I say oilier, and I don't mean like oilier on skin, I mean it smells oilier. This is an oilier smell, the eau de parfum. So this is more like the leather jack boots, the black leather, this one. And this one is more like the citruses, the herbs. So you can layer these together actually, and they work quite well. You get like sort of the in-between balance, the best of both worlds. But if you do layer these, you're going to get this as the opening and this is the dry down. That's how they're going to work when they're layered. I've already done it, so I know. I always tell people, if they smell Aramis and they think it smells too fancy for them, it's too floral, you know, if it smells a bit too dandy and they want more of that butch smell, I tell them to buy Cabochard, and they laugh because they're like, oh, but that's a woman's fragrance. I'm like, yeah, but she's wearing leather and she's got chains and whips and she's ready to write her own version of 50 Shades of Grey all over you. So, you know, she is going to make you scream and beg for mercy. So that Cabochard is not a mild-mannered fragrance. It is not a fragrance for the meek. So it is a very big bruiser. Now let's talk about Aramis. And I've got the big, the big fucking bottle, the BFB, okay? The big 8-ounce Aramis. I've got a little baby Aramis too. Here, hold on a second. Where's my small one at? It's got to be in here somewhere. Maybe it's this next drawer up. I know I got it in here. Nope, okay, maybe it's down here. Oh man, where is it? Ah, okay, here we go. So, here's a little baby Aramis bottle. It's like, this is like Mama Bear, this is the baby. It says, don't ever speak to me or my son ever again. That's that meme, right? With the big bear and the little bear. So yeah, it's the little baby bear Aramis. This one's like 2 ounces, I think. Yeah, it was 2 ounces. So, okay, now on to the important thing. I don't have to spend as long discussing the smell of Aramis because a lot of you already know what it smells like. Like I said, I really wanted to get Cabochard out of the way. That's the important one in terms of smell and the breakdown, all that. So, you know what this is. Big aliphatic aldehydes up front. I think it's C5. I could be wrong. JJ can correct me in the comments because he's the perfumer guy. He knows the different aldehydes. I don't know the letter number combination all that well. So it could be C5, it could be wrong, it could be C3. It could be see my way out of this conversation because I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about, right? It could be that too. Don't you be rude like that. I can be that way to myself, but don't you be like that or I'll block you. So, only I can make this kind of jokes by myself. Y'all get up on your high horses and you're serious, right? So I can't act like that around y'all. Y'all get serious. So, anyhow, Aramis, the fragrance, compared to Cabochard, yeah, it is a bit more light in the loafers. It is definitely a bit more light in the loafers. It's softer. It leans more towards, honestly, it leans more towards the musk profile. It leans more towards the citrus. Okay, there's more bergamot in this. The aldehydes feel to be just about the same, but because the green notes are turned down, because the leather is turned down, because a lot of those chewier elements. The waxiness is just about gone. The castoreum and the costus notes, which Aramis hasn't had real costus in a long time, right? Hasn't had real costus in forever. But, you know, whatever they're putting to play the part of costus, those costus notes get turned up in the fragrance as a result, because we're cutting down on those more, you know, agrestic notes. We're turning those agrestic notes down. So then the musks and the leathers and all that stuff crank up. So yeah, under the purview of what men wanted in the 60s, which was leather, musk, carnation, you know, that sort of stuff. They wanted, that's the white pocket square in the blazer kind of vibe they wanted back then. The dandy sort of structured, let's go to the ball, okay, let's go to a fancy restaurant. This was aimed to that person. If you're the blue collar guy who wants to smell like fougere, you know, lavender, oak moss, tonka, you're wearing Brut, which came out a year before this in '64. You're wearing Brut, you're wearing Clubman, you're wearing Canoe. You're not wearing this. This is not for that guy. This is not for the plumber, the electrician, you know. This is for the banker. This is for the guy driving the Cadillac, the guy driving the Chrysler 300. This is who that was for. And the pricing of this is also indicative of who it was for. This was at a very expensive fragrance in the 60s. This was top dollar in the 60s, okay? So Creed didn't exist, at least not perfumes. So if you were a guy in that tier of society in the 60s, you wore this. By the 70s, you know, Aramis became a bigger brand in the 70s, so prices came down a bit. And then, you know, 900 came out and Devon came out. So by the 70s into the 80s, this was more midline. But initially, in the 60s, initially, this was a very high-end product. That's who the smell was going after. It's going after that guy, that clientele. You can tell, because it is very resplendent. The aldehydes, the citruses, the carnation. The rose is subdued in this. All the other floral notes, like I said, are a bit more subdued in this. And you go through a very bright aldehyde citrus opening through the spiciness of the heart, which mixes with the florals and the carnation. No real smoke in here. The smoke is gone. You get smoke only in Cabochard. You want smoke, you got to wear the women's one. I'm sorry, guys. This is how it is. But you run through the carnation and the spices, and then you hit that costus, the castoreum, the isobutyl again, that leathery chypre base, but now it's tuned more towards the leather and away from the green notes, away from the woods. So it's less butch. It's less leather jacket. It's more sport coat now, okay? It's more tuxedo now. So that's where we're going. And sold like hotcakes. And the brilliant thing about it is it's not altogether different from Cabochard. So, and I've talked about this in my video, the video I did about Bernard Shaw himself, season 2. I discussed like how he would take all of his women's fragrances and subvert them. He took basically Aromatic's elixir and made Aramis 900, the perfume. I know Aramis 900, the product range, predates Clinique. I know that, but the original Aramis 900 product range did not include that fragrance. That wouldn't come around until 73. So those of you who are going to, again, you're going to go like this. Hey, but what about, I want to go like this to you. All right, this is what I want to do to you. So if you do this to me, I'm doing this to you. All right, and then I'm blocking you. So don't do it. All right. I just get tired of that. I really get tired of that. We're here to learn. We're here to share. We're not here to got him, gotcha, got him. We're not here to do that. All right. If you want to do that, go to Reddit and do that. That's where that kind of shit happens. All right. It doesn't happen in my comment section. If you want to correct me about something or offer me some new information, You can do it politely. Okay? You're not going to be like, what about got him? You're wrong, got him. We're not doing that. We're not playing those games. So, in conclusion, Aramis and Cabochard, like I said, they really are two sides of the same coin. And if you take them and put them behind your back, and you don't know which one is male, you don't know which one is female, you don't know which one's older or newer or any of that stuff, and you just smell them like in a vacuum. This is the takeaway, guys. This is the whole point of the video. You smell them in a vacuum, what you really get are two aspects of the same basic design, where one is trying to merge more of the classic aldehyde floral with the leather structure, the green leather structure, being the Cabochard. You know, again, the number 5 meets bandy kind of together. So, whereas Aramis is a much more refined, much more finessed, rounded, smoother. It is the more sophisticated fragrance. And because of that sophistication, because of that refinement, it doesn't feel as powerful, you know? And that's the thing. One is the mild-mannered version, and one is, you know, sun's out, guns out, right? Balked up, ready for the cage match kind of thing. And it's interesting because they're two different approaches to the same basic fragrance. You can still smell that the Aramis is alluding to that whole aldehyde floral meets leather chypre. You can smell that in Aramis, but it's more obvious in the Cabochard. Just like in the Cabochard, you can smell that there is a grand structure with a lot of musk choices, again, like the costus and all that stuff, but the green notes are so sharp and jagged that they kind of come out and they poke you like this. So if you want those elements to be more prominent, you have to switch over again to the Aramis. And anybody can wear either one. They are basically interchangeable. So there you go. That is my video on Aramis Cabochard. Two masterpieces. A word I don't use often. Two masterpieces by the late Bernard Chant. Hopefully you enjoyed watching this and you learned something. If not, hey, it's your time you wasted. I had fun filming this. Catch you next time.